Mrs. Kate at the Library of Whispers. And today we're going to read some illustrated legends of Scotland's kings and queens from this lovely library book. Kenneth MacAlpin, born 810, died 858, reigned 834 to 858. Before the legend. In ancient times, when Roman legions invaded the country known as Britain, they built a wall to protect themselves from the fierce tribes who lived in the northern parts. They named this wall after Hadrian, their emperor, and the land beyond it was called many different names, including North Britain, Alba, and Caledonia. It took almost 1,000 years before the area north of Hadrian's Wall, the land and the people the Roman Empire couldn't fully conquer, emerged as the country we now call Scotland. In 800, the northern British mainland and islands were occupied by several distinct groups of people, ruled over by their own kings and queens. Some, like the Picts, had lived there for over 1,000 years, since the Iron Age. Others, like the Scots, had arrived later. Their leaders tried to gain more power and territory by conquest and by bringing tribal families together in marriage. Kenneth MacAlpin's mother was a Pictish princess, and his father was king of the Scots. Upon the death of his father, Kenneth became king of the Scots. Years later, around 844, the Pictish lands were devastated by Viking attacks, and their king and all his direct heirs were killed. Through his mother, Kenneth had the closest claim to the throne, and so he became king of the Picts and the Scots. Under King Kenneth's command, his armies grew into the strongest force in the land, with the Scots most dominant. Kenneth wanted to unite the tribes north of Hadrian's Wall in order to properly defend the country against invasions. Because of this, Kenneth MacAlpin is commonly known as the first king of Scotland. Many people supported King Kenneth MacAlpin because he and his soldiers protected them from Vikings and other attackers. They also honoured him as their true king because he had been crowned while sitting on the Stone of Destiny. The Stone of Destiny is an oblong block of sandstone significant to Scottish people as a sacred object and an ancient symbol of Scotland's monarchy. It was thought to give those crowned upon it the lawful right to rule Scotland. When Kenneth came to the throne, the Stone of Destiny was in the care of the monks on the little island of Iona. So now we're going to read this short story, King Kenneth and the Stone of Destiny. Viking ships. The guard in the western watchtower bawled the alarm. Fire the beacon, King Kenneth MacAlpin shouted his command. With burning torches, the king's soldiers raced to set alight the huge heap of wood piled on the cliff above the beach. Great tongues of flame leapt high into the sky. Along this stretch of the Scottish mainland, the blaze of the warning signal sent people slower than they usually did. He understood that the boats were full of loot and slaves. The Viking warlords were not coming to attack. They must have already raided somewhere on the Western Isles earlier that day, and by the direction of their course, it had been Iona. The laden fleet swept past, heading north towards their home. Kenneth gave the order for the bell to be rung, letting the people know they were safe. Then, while his soldiers rebuilt the beacon bonfire, he hunkered down on the cliff top to keep watch. It was several hours before Kenneth saw what he was waiting for. In the past, the monks of Iona, who survived Viking raids, sailed to the mainland for shelter and supplies. Now, on the horizon, the king spied a tiny boat, but there was only one, buffeted by wind and waves, a single coracle with a lone figure desperately rowing for the shore. Kenneth himself went down to embrace an old monk who staggered into the sand. "Greetings, brother," said the king. "How fares Iona?" The monk gasped out his news. The frail slaughtered, the fit dragged off to be slaves, goods and livestock stolen, the church ransacked. By the grace of God, he continued, they did not find the box with St. Columba's relics which I have brought with me. Go and eat. Kenneth spoke kindly to the exhausted man, and rest after your ordeal. My king, the monk replied, there is a much bigger, precious item still on the Isle of Iona that should be taken to safekeeping. I have lived long, and I know the language of the Norsemen. I heard them talk about the sacred Stone of Destiny. The Stone of Destiny, Kenneth exclaimed. It has no value in trade. What interest do the Viking warlords have in it? Not content with merely raiding the Western Isles and coastal places, the monk answered him. More and more of them are seizing and settling on our lands. The Viking warlords plan to return in the spring and occupy Iona. From then on, they will use the Stone of Destiny to crown a Viking Jarl, or Drotten, as king over all of us. Kenneth knew it was widely believed that the Stone of Destiny had come from the Holy Land and had mysterious powers. He realised that if the stone was threatened, then so was his plan to forge an extended, safer Scots kingdom. He told a steward to arrange a meal and a bed for the old monk, and called a meeting of the king's high council. King Kenneth's lords, thanes and clan chiefs agreed that the Stone of Destiny must be moved from the vulnerable western coastlands to a secure place in the northeast mainland. We do not want a Norse king, Kenneth's cousin Donald declared. We already have a good king. He set down his drinking horn loudly on the wooden table. A good king, agreed the other council members, shouting and banging their drinking horns. Then began a discussion of how the task could be accomplished. The stone was very heavy. The coracles of the monks were too fragile to transport it. Although stout, the Scottish boats would be an easy target for the faster ships of the Norse Vikings. Our boat decks are so high that even from afar, those Viking pirates would see we had cargo and intercept us. Nigh on 100 Viking ships regularly patrol the western islands and coasts. Our fleet cannot match that number. We could never win a battle against such forces. The boat carrying the Stone of Destiny would be sluggish in the seas special ship, he said, and to avoid attracting attention, it will go alone to Iona and rescue the Stone of Destiny. At this, even his loyal cousin, Donal, protested. My king, he said, the Viking ships are speedier and stronger. That is why we need to build a similar boat for ourselves, replied Kenneth. You will organise our best craftsmen and make a Viking ship, and I, he added quietly to himself, will learn how to sew, for I have some needlework to do. It was a day of bitter cold and freezing fog when a Viking warship slid out of a secret harbour on the Scottish mainland and set sail for Iona. In the dragon prow stood Kenneth MacAlpin, helmeted in full Viking warlord dress. His crew, too, wore armour and weapons captured from Viking prisoners. Unchallenged, they reached Iona and loaded the Stone of Destiny aboard, but they had barely cleared the little island on the homeward journey when a cry from the ship's lookout alerted them to a Viking warship on the horizon. Oars flashing through the waves, the enemy ship was swiftly closing on them. We should alter course for the nearest landfall, said Donal. No, Kenneth stood unflinching in the prow. Do not increase or slow our stroke. Sail steadily onwards. Soon the Viking ship was within hailing distance. Its crew stopped rowing, while the commander cupped his fingers round his mouth and yelled across the gap. Kenneth hesitated and then yelled the same words back. What does that mean? Asked Donal. I do not know. Kenneth smiled grimly. If it is a greeting, then I have returned his greeting. If it is a question, then I have asked him the same. The oars of the Viking warship remained motionless. He is suspicious, Donal whispered. They will try to ram us. We must prepare to fight. King Kenneth reached to his scabbard, but instead of drawing his sword, he pulled a piece of triangular cloth from under his belt, crimson cloth with a motif of a large black bird. Hoist the raven flag. In a moment, the infamous red and black banner of the Viking warlords was fluttering from the Scottish mast. The commander of the approaching warship let out a whoop and thrust his fist in the air. They believe it. They think we are Viking warlords, cried Donal. Kenneth gave a mighty roar and punched his own fist in the air. Laughter from the men on the other vessel echoed over the water. Their oars dipped, and the true Viking ship drew away. That night there was feasting and rejoicing in the king's fortress, for King Kenneth MacAlpin had brought the Stone of Destiny safely to the mainland, thus saving the kingdom and securing the heritage of the Scots. Beyond the legend. Tales about Kenneth MacAlpin say that he took the Stone of Destiny to Scone, near Perth, to keep it safe. Scone became a sacred place of huge importance where Scottish kings and queens were crowned while sitting upon the stone. The stone also became known as the Stone of Scone and is one of Scotland's priceless treasures. The relic box of St. Columba was given into the care of the monks at Dunkeld. King Kenneth MacAlpin also moved his kingdom's religious centre there. Tradition claims the relic box is the Monymusk reliquary, now a most important piece in the National Museum of Scotland. Centuries passed before a Scottish kingdom ranging from Hadrian's Wall to the Shetland Islands came envisage the land of the Scots that would become Scotland. It is from King Kenneth and his family that all Scottish royalty descended. Queen Crook, born 1015, died 1057, married to King MacBeth 1040 to 1057, before the legend. By the year 1000, different tribal areas of northern Britain were slowly melding together. However, the method of deciding who would be the ruler of these peoples and lands was complicated. Traditional customs meant that it wasn't always the king's or queen's child who would be crowned next. Sometimes it was a brother or nephew, depending on circumstances and the views of the High Council. This led to family fights, brutal murder, battles and war, often with English or Viking armies getting involved to support one side or the other. In 1040, King Duncan I was the first monarch to rule over a wider kingdom of Scots, Picts, Strathclyde and Lothian, which began to be referred to as Scotia or Scotland. To extend his territory even further north, King Duncan invaded the region of Moray, which belonged to his cousin MacBeth. In the battle that followed, Duncan was killed. MacBeth and his wife Crook were, like Duncan, direct descendants of the royal line of Kenneth MacAlpin. Both their grandfathers had been kings, thus their combined claim to the Scottish throne was so strong that the High Council agreed MacBeth should be crowned as the new king. So now we're going to read Queen Crook, King Macbeth, and the Ferocious Beast. When Lord Macbeth of Moray was elected King of Scotland, he wanted his wife, Crook, be crowned queen in her own right. Lady Macbeth is a direct descendant of our first king, and is entitled to rule equally with me, Macbeth told the thanes and clan chiefs of the Scottish High Council. On the morrow morning, at Scone, my wife should sit beside me on the stone of destiny, and be anointed Queen of Scotia while I am crowned your new king. Macduff, the Thane of Fife, pointed to Lady Macbeth, who stood behind her husband's chair, without written proof of her lineage. Your wife has no claim. That we have. Macbeth took a roll of parchment from Crook and laid it on the table. Most of the councillors nodded. Crook's ancestry was indeed from the royal MacAlpin family. However, Macduff disagreed. It would be easy for your scribe to create false records. Anyone who wishes to dispute my heritage may read this and challenge me. Crook spoke meekly, but her eyes glittered. Macduff's face flushed red, for it was known that, like some others there, he could neither read nor write. I do challenge you, Macduff scowled. Your descent may be true, but a ruler needs to be fearless and fierce in combat. As a mere woman, this you can never be. Females are too delicate and nervous to take part even in rough play. He swung his blade over his shoulder. We men must leave now, for the boat hunt is ready to depart. as he went by. "Beware, they will put a spell upon you." Grug ignored him and beckoned the women to come closer. "Go to the kitchens," she said, "and tell them Lady Macbeth sent you to be fed." Then Grug took a purse from her belt and gave it to the women. They thanked her loudly. "Hail the house of Macbeth! Praise to you both, Lord and Lady Macbeth, King and Queen hereafter." As the three women passed her, Grug spoke vehemently. "And remember you are ladies and worthy of your place in this world." The sound of horns and hounds baying caused Grug to switch her gaze to the men and dogs streaming in the direction of the forest where wild boar roamed free. Her chin lifted in a determined tilt. She turned and hurried towards the royal apartments while summoning a stable boy. "Saddle me a Garan pony." The lad hesitated. "At once," insisted Grug. In the forest, the hounds had caught the scent and were sending up a hullabaloo for the hunters to follow their trail. Galloping around thorny bushes and dense undergrowth, Macbeth led the way until finally they arrived at a wide space among the trees where the dogs held the boar at bay against the trunk of an oak. The wild beast was furious at being cornered. It plunged and thrashed, and catching a dog on its thick, sharp tusks, tossed it in the air. Then the boar lowered its huge head to charge. "Thugad, look out!" Macbeth shouted. Men scattered from its path, except for someone in a hooded tunic who dashed forward. "Oh, Macreich!" Macbeth shouted his warning again, for it was clear that this person would be trampled and gored. The slim figure did not falter, but rammed the base of a long hunting spear into the earth with the tip angled towards the attacking beast, and crouched to hold it fast as the boar, in blind rage, came thundering on. Against the force of its own charge, the beast impaled itself on the spear and crashed to the ground, mortally wounded. There was a roar of awe and admiration from the huntsman. "Approach your king," Macbeth commanded. "Show your face and say your name. For," he added in a quieter voice, "you are either a madman or brave beyond belief." "Brave beyond belief," Macduff cried out, and everyone there echoed his cry. The figure drew back, the tunic hood. "Grug!" Macbeth leapt down from his horse and gathered his wife in his arms. "No man can state that my wife is not fierce and fearless," for Macduff himself called out the words "brave beyond belief." Macbeth declared, "Lady Macbeth will be crowned Queen Grug of Scotland." And so, at Scone, sitting on the sacred stone of destiny, Grug was crowned as rightful queen alongside Macbeth. Queen Grug did not forget that her claim to the throne might have been dismissed because she was female. Neither did she forget the three women begging at the castle gate on the morning before her coronation. During her reign, a law was passed which meant that henceforth daughters were entitled to a share of their family inheritance. Beyond the legend. 500 years after Macbeth and Grug died, William Shakespeare wrote his famous work Macbeth. His play gives us a very different picture of Grug, Lady Macbeth, but historical sources tell us that Queen Grug and King Macbeth were good and wise monarchs assembled an army and marched into Scotland. MacBeth was killed in battle, and Malcolm Canmore was crowned King Malcolm III of Scotland. Before 10 years of Malcolm's reign had passed, something quite momentous happened to Scotland's nearest neighbour. The English king died childless, leaving only a 14-year-old great-nephew as direct heir to his crown. In 1066, a rival claimant, Duke William of Normandy, crossed the Channel, conquered England, and seized the royal throne. William the Conqueror's invasion of England also affected Scotland in an unexpected and romantic way, when a ship carrying a young princess sailed into the Firth of Forth. So this story is Queen Margaret and the Perfect Pearl. When William the Conqueror had himself crowned King of England, King Malcolm III of Scotland offered his protection to the boy who could have inherited the English throne. The young prince sailed to the Scottish court in Dunfermline with his mother and 2 sisters, one of whom was called Margaret. Princess Margaret was a kind and graceful young lady. Her name Margaret means a pearl, and her nature was like her name, for pearls are symbols of generosity and integrity. No wonder then that King Malcolm fell deeply in love with her, and they were soon married. In those days, most people, including royalty and nobles, couldn't read or write. The wealthy had scholars and scribes to do this for them. However, Margaret was well educated, and she was passionate about reading, especially religious texts. Margaret and Malcolm lived at a time before the printing press, when all writing was done by hand on sheets of parchment. This meant that books were rare and extremely expensive. King Malcolm saw that his beloved wife greatly admired books, so he arranged to have her favourite manuscripts bound into a marvellously illustrated volume. The cover was made of fine leather, decorated with gold leaf, and to honour his wife and her name, Malcolm had it studded with a large, perfect freshwater pearl from the River Forth. Margaret treasured her beautiful book and always carried it with her wherever she went. In the evening, Malcolm and Margaret would sit together by the fire in the king's fortress, and she would read to him. King Malcolm adored Margaret and was enthralled by her voice and the power of the language. The Scottish people also adored Margaret, for she tended the sick, served orphans from her own table, and taught local children to read. Although the court resided in Dunfermline, King Malcolm began to conduct more royal business in Edinburgh, which lay on the far side of the River Forth. Malcolm described the growing, bustling town to his wife, and revealed that he was planning a tiny chapel for her at the top of Edinburgh Castle Rock. One day, Margaret decided to travel with him to see the site for herself. The River Forth cuts across the centre of Scotland, separating Dunfermline and Edinburgh, with a broad estuary or firth which flows into the North Sea. Near Dunfermline, the Forth was too wide for a bridge. The only way to cross at that point was to sail over the dangerous tidal water. The weather was blustery, with a heavy, luring sky, when the royal party reached the jetty on the north side of the river. "Why is it so crowded here?" Queen Margaret gestured at the men, women and children lined along the quayside. "Families go to Edinburgh seeking work. Traders bring goods to sell," King Malcolm told her, "and many pilgrims journey to and from the sacred shrines in St. Andrews. To save walking miles to the nearest bridge, these folk are waiting to hire a boatman." Margaret's mind was troubled as she and her husband boarded the royal ferry boat. Their craft was stoutly built, with a proper sail and strong oarsmen to pull through the deadly currents from the North Sea. Yet to her, the various sailing and rowing boats bobbing around on the swirling water seemed fragile and easy prey to the wind or tides. "Come, dear wife, shelter beneath the awning." Malcolm glanced at the gathering grey clouds. "There's a squall blowing in." The Queen shook her head and went to stand in the prow of the boat. The other boats were hurrying to the shore, except for one, which was already midway in the Firth, battling against an ever-increasing wind. "Look!" Margaret pointed in alarm. "That little boat, it's being swept out to sea." The King frowned. "It's taking on water fast. I fear they'll be swamped. There's nothing we can do." "My husband, please," the Queen begged him, "for pity's sake. It is a family. A father and mother are on that boat. Listen. Their babe in the basket is calling out for help." And it was true. The wailing of the infant sounded above the howl of the gale. "Woman," King Malcolm grunted, "the sea is too choppy for us to change course. The oarsmen would be slow to follow my order anyway. You could have us all drowned." But the sailors on the royal ferry boat revered their queen. She nursed their children when they were ill and gave alms to the needy. So even as the king was speaking, the coxswain drummed a signal. The oarsmen bent to their task, and with supreme effort swung the royal ferry boat to face into the teeth of the storm. Minutes passed before they drew alongside the small craft, struggling in the mounting waves. Sweat was running down the father's brow as he desperately sculled his oars. The mother was frantically bailing water whilst the child sobbed in terror. "We have them," Margaret cried in relief. Then suddenly the little boat overturned. The mother and father could swim, but the basket containing the baby floated away. Margaret screamed, "The baby! The baby!" Within seconds, the coxswain had lashed a rope to his waist, dived into the water. Both Margaret and Malcolm gripped the rope as the sailor, floundering, tried to catch the basket. "Heaven help us," implored Margaret. Malcolm barked directions, and with a final surge of effort, the coxswain grabbed the basket and tossed it onto the deck. With no care for her rich garments, Margaret lifted the sodden infant and cradled him on her knee. The mother and father were dragged on board, while Margaret wrapped their child in her velvet cloak, cuddling him close to keep him warm. Clad in dry clothes, the parents huddled under the awning. Margaret gave the baby to his mother, and then the Queen sat quietly until the royal ferry boat docked at the jetty on the Edinburgh side of the river. Onlookers who had witnessed the brave rescue cheered loudly. Queen Margaret stood and raised her hands high in the air. Everyone fell silent. They saw that the Queen was showing them her most precious possession, the ornately bound book with its exquisite cover of fine leather, decorated in gold leaf and studded with a large freshwater pearl. With firm fingers, Margaret grasped the pearl and wrenched it from its setting. She held the perfect jewel aloft and spoke in her clear voice. "This pearl, a bounty from the river Forth, was given to me as a gift. Now I will give back something more valuable to the river and to Scotland. My pearl will be sold to earn money enough to build a sturdy, seaworthy ferry boat. It will securely carry those who wish to travel stories and stained glass pictures, Queen Margaret is closely connected with her Gospel book. It is said that the book once fell into a stream but was miraculously recovered undamaged. The book still exists and is kept in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, with a facsimile on display at St Margaret's Chapel. St Margaret's Chapel is the oldest surviving building in Edinburgh and is part of Edinburgh Castle. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. But if you enjoyed that, let me know in the comments, and I will do some more legends of Scottish kings and queens for you. Bye bye for now. Bye bye. Hello everybody, this is Kate at the Library of Whispers, and today I'm going to do another reading from this lovely library book, The Illustrated Legends of Scotland's Kings and Queens. So I've popped a bookmark on the page that we were up to. So if you missed the last reading, I'll put a link in the description of this video. So we were up to King David the First, who was born 1084, died 1153, and he reigned between 1124 and 1153. Before the legend. After the deaths of Queen Margaret and King Malcolm, their sons inherited the Scottish crown. The last of these, their youngest child, was King David the First. Like his mother, King David was canonised as a saint of the Christian Church. He led a life of devotion to God by prayer and good works, and took care of the poor, establishing monasteries and building abbey houses to be used as hospitals, with rooms for the homeless. However, David had not always been a prayerful person. This story tells us of why he began to mend his ways. It happened on the 14th of September, the date which celebrates the Feast of the Holy Cross, or the Holy Rood, a sacred symbol in Christianity. In David's time it was regarded as a holy day, and everyone was meant to attend church. King David and the White Stag. King David loved his horse's neck and trotted on towards the grassy glade. However, his horse refused to move. The king dismounted and pulled the reins to urge the animal to follow him. Still the horse would not budge. "Very well," said David, "I will take some rest here myself," and he walked forward, alone. With an ominous rumble of thunder, a dark cloud rolled across the sky, blocking the light from the sun. David shivered and looked around him. The trees in the glade were ancient hawthorn and formed a perfect circle. Faintly he heard the noise of the hunt, but now, like the bird song, the sound was muted, as if a great distance away. "Almost like another world," the king murmured to himself. He'd no sooner said those words aloud when, crashing into the glade, came a magnificent white hart. David caught his breath in sudden shock. A stag at bay is a dangerous beast. Enraged, its attack can easily gore a man to death. This one had a huge array of antlers, thick, strong, sharp. The stag stretched its neck and gave a mighty bellow, then lowered its head to charge. David trembled in terror. The world seemed to stop. Time slowed down. Hemmed in by the trees, there was no escape. David resolved to die nobly, as a king should. He flung himself on his knees and extended his arms wide to expose his chest to the onslaught. At that moment, the cloud shifted. The sun shone dazzling through the leaves, casting the shadow of the king upon the stag. The beast paused, raised its head, eyes bulging, nostrils flaring. A distinct shape of the Holy Cross rested on the face of the white hart. It quivered, and turning, bounded out of the glade, and was gone. Shaking, King David got to his feet. There and then he made a solemn vow. "In this exact place I, King David of Scotland, will build a monastery and church." He closed his eyes, "and I will name it the Church of the Holy Rood." Beyond the legend. King David I of Scotland founded Holyrood Abbey in 1128. An old Celtic tradition tells of white harts, which are very rare, being sent from the other world to warn a person that they must change their life. King David worked to improve government, to introduce the first Scottish coins, and to unite the Highlands and Lowlands of Scotland. The ruins of Holyrood Abbey are now an impressive feature in the grounds of the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. The place is the official residence of the British monarch in Scotland. Its emblem, the head of a stag with a cross between its antlers, is displayed on the gates. William the Lion, born 1142, died 1214, reigned 1165 to 1214. Before the legend, King William I of Scotland, now known as William the Lion, was crowned at Scone on Christmas Eve in 1165. He was a grandson of King David I of Scotland and was renowned as a bold and fearless leader. William was strong and tall and fought so bravely in battle that even spoke gently to the lad. A king must not just lead his people, he must also be seen to lead his people. Gavin returned the war helmet to its place in the corner of the royal tent and sighed while helping the king buckle on his metal breastplate. I cannot show fear to my men, William went on, else they would not stay with me. No one doubts your bravery, Gavin exclaimed as he followed William outside. The nobles awaiting William echoed the cry. Our king is as brave as a rampant lion. The mass of his troops took up the words with cheers and yells. Brave as a lion, brave as a lion. Still praising their king, the Scots surged forward to face their foe. Red-haired William and his squire led the way with the pole of the royal banner fixed in Gavin's saddle sconce. The army of the Earls of Orkney, who had invaded Caithness in the north of the Scottish mainland, was ranged in front of them in ranks. On catching sight of William's heir, the Orcadians shouted a war cry, "The Crimson King! Kill the Crimson King!" Astride his mount, broadsword striking right and left, William was unshaken by their cries and did not flinch from the attack. By his side, Gavin wielded his own weapon. Inch by inch they were gaining. But then disaster struck. A huge Orcadian swung his battle axe, and Gavin was unhorsed. The young squire crashed to the ground, his hand still held aloft the king's golden banner, for he was determined it would not be captured. Despite blows raining down upon his arm, Gavin refused to release his grip. William's men fought on in fury, driving the Orkney army from the field. However, the Scottish soldiers could not rejoice in their victory. Their camp that evening was silent in sadness as Gavin's battered body was carried in on the king's own shield. The young standard-bearer was popular with everyone, and the king especially was overcome with grief. "Och, Gavin, Gavin," William lamented. He looked at his war helmet in the corner of the royal tent. "It is not my ears, but my heart that will ache, if you never sing that same song again." Through the dark night, while the king's doctor strove to keep the boy alive, William was troubled by restless thoughts. During a battle, soldiers needed to see their king and know he had not deserted them. But Gavin had also been right. It was the sight of his red hair that had attracted the enemy. Without his helmet, the Earls of Orkney had thought to kill him easily, and now his trusted squire was paying the price. surviving all his battles, living into his 70s and becoming one of the longest reigning Scottish monarchs. He is buried in the renowned abbey he founded at Arbroath. King Alexander III, born 1241, died 1286, reigned 1249 to 1286. Before the legend, King Alexander III was the grandson of William the Lion. In many ways, young King Alexander was like his grandfather, a bold and daring leader. But whereas his grandfather often rushed in to fight, Alexander was more thoughtful and planned carefully before a battle. The Scots were lucky to have Alexander as king at this time, but the country was under increasing threat from the Vikings, who were trying to claim the Western Isles as Norwegian territory. King Alexander realised that if the Norsemen made the Isles their base, then all of Scotland would be in danger. In 1262, when he was barely 21, Alexander declared that the Western Isles belonged to the Scottish people. To confront this challenge, King Haakon IV of Norway assembled a huge number of Viking ships and warriors. The following year, he sailed the Norwegian fleet down the western coast and up the firth of the River Clyde to land in late summer on the Isle of Arran. King Haakon intended to invade mainland Scotland from the sea. King Alexander and the Viking invaders. If we engage in a naval battle with King Haakon, our ships will be utterly destroyed. Ross, the captain of Scotland's war council, spoke quietly to the king. With a heavy heart, King Alexander nodded. Captain Ross was an old, experienced warrior and a wise judge of this dire situation. The Scottish fleet was vastly outnumbered. The king and the captain were standing on the shore of the mainland, looking across the firth to Arran. From here, smoke rising above campfires told them that the Vikings were gathering on the island to launch their attack. "Your men are not afraid to fight," said Ross. "It is a glorious thing to die for our country." "Indeed it is," King Alexander responded, "and yet, rather than seeking glory, sometimes a battle is better fought with guile." "You are a canny lad, sire," said the captain, "but it cannot be denied that there are more of them than there are of us." Alexander bent and dipped his index finger in the water at his feet. He held it up, twisting it this way and that to test the direction of the wind. Then the young king grinned at Captain Ross. "I'm minded to go to Arran under a flag of truce. I suggest that we negotiate a peaceful solution." With as big a force as he has, King Haakon has no need to negotiate. What makes you think he'll accept your proposal to parley? coasts and small islands, they can sally forth to raid the enemy's ships. Thus we whittle down the odds. Viking longboats are designed to run swiftly and high upon beaches in shallow water, said Captain Ross, and now the wind is shifting, providing speed for their sails. The wind is indeed shifting, Alexander's eyes gleamed, providing speed for their sails, but with it comes storms, roaring in from the wild Atlantic Ocean. Our ships are heavier, the better to withstand foul weather. The Norsemen will strike soon, Captain Ross warned him, and when they strike, they will strike hard. Yes, we have stalled them as much as is possible, but although we cannot influence exactly when they will strike, Alexander spoke slowly, perhaps we can influence where. And lowering his voice, Alexander gave Captain Ross specific instructions as to how to deploy the Scottish foot soldiers. King Alexander was aware that King Hakon's patience was wearing thin, and negotiations were breaking down, but rather than bringing the Scottish fleet and infantry together to meet the inevitable attack, Alexander kept to his strategy, docking his ship's way about the Firth and placing units of soldiers to guard sandy beaches where longboats were most expected. Then he stationed the greater part of the army not far from a stony shore near logs. As Alexander stretched out their talks, King Hakon, who was not stupid, became suspicious. Seeing no end to the negotiations, the Norwegian king prepared to invade Scotland. His spies had reported that groups of Scottish soldiers were patrolling the sandy beaches best suited for his longships. Hakon told his commanders to avoid these and instead find an unwatched stony beach where shiploads of armed warriors could anchor and wade ashore. In order not to make a noise with their boots crunching on the pebbles, the men would go barefoot. When such a beach was found, and it was also discovered that the main war camp of the Scots was a short distance inland, King Hakon's plan was set in motion. On a moonless night, with oars muffled, the Viking ships slid silently towards the town of Largs. The men removed their footgear and belted up their tunics so that their legs were bare. Gingerly, they tiptoed across the pebble beach. Ahead of them, glimmering in the darkness, they saw the lanterns of the Scots war camp. Perhaps Alexander himself was there. They might even be able to capture the Scottish king. They chuckled to themselves as they gripped their swords and axes. There was only one field of what looked like long grass rushes to run through before they fell upon the sleeping Scots. They charged forward and began to shriek and scream in pain. What the Norsemen had taken for long grass rushes were in fact huge, jaggy Scottish thistles, tall and sturdy with thick barbed spines which viciously tore their skin, stabbed and scratched their faces, and stuck in their bare legs and feet. The howling and yowling of the Vikings alerted the watchmen, who were concealed in ditches enclosing the camp. The alarm bell clanged. The Scottish soldiers rose quickly, grabbing dogs, broadswords, and claymores. Fighting fiercely, King Alexander and his men chased the Vikings from Largs. The very next day a violent storm blew in from the grey Atlantic Ocean. Alexander's forces were safely moored in protected inlets. Caught in the open, King a special assembly or parliament of people to help pass laws, and Scotland enjoyed years of peace and prosperity. The thistle was later adopted as the national flower and an emblem of Scotland. It first appeared on coins in the 1400s and was incorporated as part of the Royal Arms of Scotland, Order of Chivalry, the most ancient and noble order of the thistle. Well, I hope you enjoyed those 3 stories, and next time we'll do Robert the Bruce. England's towns and fortresses were free, except for one of the most important, Stirling Castle. In the middle of the country, at the gateway to the Highlands, perched on a rocky crag, this magnificent defensive stronghold remained in English hands. The Scottish army besieged it, successfully trapping those inside and blockading the entry roads. Terms were agreed that if an English relief force did not arrive at Stirling and get supplies through to the castle by Midsummer's Day, 1314, the castle governor would surrender to King Robert the Bruce. King Edward I of England had died, but his son, King Edward II, was also committed to defeating the Scots. He mustered an enormous army and marched north to do battle on Midsummer's Day. He intended to break apart the blockade, destroy Bruce's army and subdue Scotland. With a baggage train of over 20 miles, such a host of warriors had never been seen before in Britain. Robert was hopelessly outnumbered. The English had more than 3 times his foot soldiers, archers and mounted knights, yet defiantly on Midsummer Eve, above a burn on the hill facing Stirling Castle, King Robert the Bruce raised the royal standard of Scotland, the red lion rampant on a field of yellow gold. Here, at the Bannockburn, he declared, we stand and fight for Scotland. Despite protests by James Douglas, Robert wanted to speak personally with his men assembling at the Carsland Plough, minus his breastplate and sword, his only weapon, a battle-axe, stuck in his belt, and his only defence, his helmet with its gold coronet. Robert trotted out on a small Garon pony to encourage the Scots to fight well on the morrow. At that moment, the first of the English heavy cavalry appeared, riding to where their infantry was already ranged along the far end of the cars. One of the knights, Sir Henry de Bohun, caught sight of the lone figure, the Scottish king, unprotected and without armour or bodyguard. In breach of the knightly code of chivalry, Sir Henry decided this was easy prey. Here was his opportunity to finish the battle before it began, and gain fame and fortune as the slayer of Robert the Bruce. The English knight extended his lance and galloped towards the King of Scots. Alerted by a shout from James Douglas, Robert swiveled round to see horse and man almost upon him in an unstoppable charge. Grasping his battle-axe in one hand, the king twitched his pony's reins to make it step nimbly aside. Then Robert rose in his stirrups to swing the axe in a deadly arc with a single stroke, cleaving Sir Henry's helmet and skull. A deafening roar went up from the Scottish troops. The king cantered back to James, who berated him for putting himself in such danger. I have broken my good battle-axe, dear friend, Robert told him calmly. Be so good as to fetch me another. Next morning, in the early dawn of Midsummer's Day, after prayers, before the relics of St. Columba, King Robert the Bruce addressed the Scottish army. My lords, my people, who lay great weight on freedom, think on the many trials we have suffered and our struggles for the right to be a kingdom. I call on you to fight now for this right, for honour and for liberty. Today, for Scotland, Ferocious is honoured as the king who achieved the ultimate goal of gaining Scotland its internationally recognised freedom, affirmed via the Declaration of Arbroath, written in 1320 by King Robert and his earls and barons of Scotland. The Declaration inspired later statements of the people's right to govern themselves, including, it is thought, the United States of America's Declaration of Independence. Joe's astonishment upon hearing his name shouted so loudly, King James turned his head to nod and smile. Murdo thought he might swoon with happiness. He immediately decided he had to get closer to see the tournament. Cheers and applause greeted the royal party's arrival at the tournament field to take their seats in velvet chairs on the raised platforms, surrounded by Scottish nobles and honoured guests. Behind these front rows, manservants and maids sat on benches. The commoners jostled for good positions in the side standing areas, where they were kept back by wooden fencing and soldier guards. King James had paused to speak to some of these folk, and hearing their pleas to see more of the entertainment, And so I thought. Murdo broke off, unable to continue, and began to moan in pain. King James quirked an eyebrow. And so you thought to impress your king by your prowess with the mace and chain? But Murdo could not answer. He was chewing his lip to stop himself howling in the presence of his king. The squire returned with a flask of vinegar and a barber surgeon. The barber surgeon glanced at Murdo's leg and shook his head. Nothing can be done. Best leave him to bleed out. A merciful death. What? King James exclaimed. Do you not take an oath to preserve life? The only oaths I hear are from my patients while I tie off piles or extract bladder stones. Barber surgeon quipped. I am not amused by your response, the king snapped. I beg pardon, sire. The blow probably damaged the thigh bone. Evil humours are trapped inside his body, which produce poison and flesh rot. I could saw off the leg below the hip and cauterize with a hot iron, but being a child, he'd die from shock. The barber surgeon indicated the ground, saturated red. The boy has lost a lot of blood. A main conduit is opened. Let it gush from him. I think it is an easier way to pass from our world to the glory that awaits us. I do not believe in evil humours, the king spoke crisply. He grasped the flask. I have read that vinegar can prevent infection. The blood is not in full flow, and the colour less vibrant, meaning that a main artery has not been severed. Are you familiar with ligatures? Which texts you've studied? Galen? Anything recent? Do you know the work of Henri de Mondeville? Sire, the barber surgeon stuttered, I am not wealthy enough to afford books. I schooled myself in my trade by experience, by trial and error. In other words, King James waved the man away. He beckoned his squire and pointed to the servants' benches. Fetch Janet Turing, my head seamstress, and bring her lap bag with her. King James had knelt beside Murdo and was swabbing the wound when the seamstress ran up. I require your help, he said. We must stitch this boy's leg, else he will die. Sire, I have not done such needlework before, the woman whispered in fright. Neither have I, King James winked to reassure her. Pretend it is a new pair of breeks that you are sewing for your king. Choose your thinnest, strongest thread and a curved needle, stout king's glove tucked into his belt, and if anyone asked why, Murdo would show them his childish teeth marks embedded in the fabric and relate the story of how his life was saved by the learned and kindly King James IV of Scotland. Beyond the legend. Janet Turing was a real person mentioned in court records as the seamstress who stitched King James IV's underwear. Concerned about the lack of specialist medical care in his country, King James established the Barber Surgeons of Edinburgh as a city guild whose members had the highest standards of surgical practice. The guild is now the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, one of the oldest and most prestige surgical corporations. Its museum has the world's largest and most historically significant collection of surgical specimens, or body parts. James IV was a great example of a Renaissance king, a forward-thinking ruler who cared for his people. He introduced the printing press, strengthened the economy, and increased Scotland's prestige in medical science. Okay, so I think we'll leave it there. Next time we will begin by reading Mary Queen of Scots. I hope you enjoyed that. This has been Kate at the Library Whispers saying I shall see you very, very soon. Bye bye for now. Bye bye. Hello everybody, this is Kate at the Library Whispers, and today we're going to continue reading this lovely library book, Illustrated Legends of Scotland's Kings and Queens. So let's check to see where we are up to. And here we are. a terrible battle was fought east of Edinburgh, around a gorge called Pinkie Clough. Sheltering in the mighty fortress of Stirling Castle, Mary and her mother anxiously awaited news of the outcome that would decide their fate. Mary, Queen of Scots, and the Four Marys. Disaster. In the great hall of Stirling Castle, Lord John Erskine stood in front of Mary of Guise. His head was bowed in sorrow. It breaks my heart to tell you how badly we are defeated. Thousands of Scots lie dead at Pinkie Clough, many of your loyal lords among them. And now the traitor lords who accepted bribes from Henry VIII to take up his cause will come here with English soldiers to seize my daughter. Mary of Guise got to her feet. Never, never will I betray our country by permitting England to annex Scotland in this way. My French family will help us if I ask them. Because of England's actions, there is now general agreement in our Parliament to a Scottish alliance with France, said Lord Erskine. Perhaps the King of France would provide a refuge for Queen Mary and an army to support us in driving out the English invaders. To protect my child and the Scottish people, I would buckle on armour and take on a sword in my own hand. Mary of Guise's voice shook with passion. I don't doubt it, Lord Erskine replied in genuine admiration, but at the moment we need to find you both a place of safety. On my lands there is a loch with a tiny island, and on the island is a monk's priory. It is less than 20 miles from here to Inchmahome. We could leave secretly tonight. Bundled up on her mother's lap, 4-year-old Queen Mary thought it was thrilling to gallop under the stars and row across a loch. The brother abbot welcomed them to the community and gave them the best furnished guest rooms of Inchmahome Priory, where his royal visitors quickly adapted to the rhythm of monastic life. Mary and her mother would stroll along the arched cloisters, watching the monks at work. Brother Cook, in the kitchen, let Mary stir the soup pot and knead the bread dough. Brother Carpenter showed Mary how to crank the handle of the wood-turning lathe while he fashioned her a wooden spinning top. But Mary's favourite place to be was outdoors, for she loved the natural world. With Brother Gardner, she gathered the orchard harvest of plums, red ripe apples and golden pears. She collected an apron full of sweet chestnuts and begged to be allowed to plant one. It will be years before your chestnut tree flowers, her mother said. When I am grown up, I'll come back and visit it, Mary replied. She buried her chestnut and then, studying the mound of earth where it lay, said, I will plant another chestnut for you, Mamma, and also one for Papa. Then my trees won't be lonely. I am sorry you are frequently by yourself, said Mary of Guise. My hours are taken up with writing important letters to France on your behalf. I know this, Mamma, and I thank you, but it's dull being on my own. It is unfortunate then, said her mother, eyes twinkling, that I've arranged an amiable gift in advance of your 5th birthday. What is this gift? Mary was intrigued. It might not be one gift, it might be 2 or 3, or perhaps even 4. Mary of Guise smiled at her daughter, and no matter sat at the top of the broad table with another woman standing by her chair. Lady Fleming. Mary was glad to see a familiar face. At the royal court, Lady Fleming cared for the young daughters of noble families and trained them to be ladies in waiting. If Scotland hadn't been at war with England, Mary would already have been allocated several of these girls as attendants and companions. Mary knew that Lady Fleming's own daughter was 4 years old. Her heart began to beat faster. Would she now have someone to play with? Had Lady Fleming brought her daughter with her to Inchmer home? Mary looked at her mother. Dare she ask the question? Mary of Guise gazed fondly at her. Is there something you wish to say, my child? Breathless with tension, Mary glanced around. There was clearly no other child in the room, and so she remained silent. With a merry laugh, Mary of Guise nodded to Lady Fleming. Lady Fleming bowed to Mary, Queen of Scots. May I present your personal ladies-in-waiting and companions? Mary blinked. Where were they? Your Grace. Mary heard a soft voice behind her. She whirled around. A girl of about her own age and height had crept through the door. My name is Mary Seaton. My name is Mary Beaton. Another girl jumped up from where she had been hiding under the table. My name is Mary Fleming. A small face peeked between the window drapes. My name is Mary Livingston. The last girl stepped out of the chimney nook. Each of the 4 girls came forward and bowed to their queen. explained we need to move further north from the lowlands. Oh, my poor Mary's coming too. We mustn't attract attention, so it's better if they do not join us. But I thought it was a game, Mary wailed, like hide and seek. This is not a game, I assure you. For once, Mary of Keys was impatient. It is a matter of life and death. Mary's children. There are also 3 sweet chestnut trees, and they are old enough to fit the stories that say they were planted by Mary, Queen of Scots. Dumbarton Castle still stands overlooking the Firth of Clyde, where Mary first saw the grand galley of the King of France that took her to childhood safety. Queen Mary had a close relationship with her mother, which was unusual for royal children at that time. They exchanged loving letters throughout young Mary's years in France. Originals and copies of Mary's letters still exist. Some are held in the National Library of Scotland. Union of the Crowns of Scotland and England, 1603. After King Henry VIII of England died, his 3 children in turn ruled England, the last one being Queen Elizabeth I. But none of them left any children to inherit the English crown. When Elizabeth I died, the closest royal descendant was James Stuart, son of Mary, Queen of Scots. He had been crowned King James VI of Scotland in 1567. The union of the Scottish and English crowns took place in 1603, when James was crowned in London to reign as King James I of Great Britain and Ireland. After the coronation in London, James VI and I lived and had his court in London and only once returned to Scotland. All the kings and queens of Scotland since then have also been kings and queens of England, Wales and Ireland, or Northern Ireland. The son of King James VI and I became King Charles I. He wanted to rule with absolute authority and would not agree to having a parliament of the people to represent views other than his own. In 1649, civil war broke out. Charles was killed, and for the next 10 years there was no king or queen. This time is known as the interregnum. In 1660, the monarchy was restored to King Charles's sons, and after that continued via their female line of descent. Scotland's queens and kings once had great power, but after centuries of struggle, people gained a say over their own lives. The system of government became a constitutional monarchy, where laws are made by members of a parliament elected by the people. The king or queen signs these laws as head of state and is seen as a symbol for the country. The Scottish and English parliaments united in 1707, which created the United Kingdom of Great Britain. For many years, Scotland received little attention from the London-based royal family. It wasn't until the 19th century that Scotland gained a special place in the life of a reigning monarch. This was due to a young queen called Victoria. Queen Victoria, born 1819, died 1901, reigned 1837 to 1901. Before the legend. Queen Victoria was born at Kensington Palace, London, on the 24th of May, 1819. She was the only child of the 4th son of King George III, who was the great-great-great-great-grandchild of King James VI and I. Victoria was just 18 years old when she was crowned Queen of Great Britain. There was resistance to her accession to the throne, for many doubted her ability to rule a country and an empire. Due to her youth, inexperience, and the fact that she was female, it was suggested a against his wishes. On one such occasion, she proved that in addition to being a dutiful monarch, she was also incredibly brave. The couple spent happy hours together and regularly travelled in an open carriage about London, where passers-by would wave to them. They had only been married 2 years when an incident occurred as they were being driven through the Mall of St. James's Park. and self-respect, she added, quietly, almost to herself. Intent on persuading his wife, Albert searched for the right words. The police commissioner quickly suggested, perhaps, if it pleases the Queen, the royal carriage could set out from Buckingham Palace tomorrow. Yes, Prince Albert agreed. I see your plan. A decoy. With respect, sir, not exactly. More of a ruse to lure this man to act. I will ensure the whole area is flooded with police officers in plain clothes. For tomorrow, a closed, empty carriage, Albert nodded. Ah, the police commissioner hesitated. I suspect if the carriage were closed, the assassin will not break from cover. It needs to be the usual open barouche. Then we can pull over the hood and have someone else dressed as the Queen, said Albert. It is true that every one of my staff, including I, believe the women clerks in our new police force would want to volunteer to disguise themselves as Her Majesty. Yet the police commissioner's voice tailed off. Now Victoria was inexperienced in many aspects of ordinary life, but she was attentive. Watching and listening to the police commissioner, she immediately understood his concerns. It is essential that I am visible in the carriage, she stated. Otherwise the man won't show himself or make an attempt upon my life. I cannot allow it, Albert cried. Any man or woman within Buckingham Palace would gladly take your place. Soldiers may die in battle, fighting to defend their country, Victoria replied, but I will not deliberately send a person to be killed in my stead. And furthermore, she spoke lightly, hoping to coax a smile to her husband's grim face. Whom do you recommend would dress as Queen? Equerry Gilbert. Despite his unease, Albert did smile. Victoria was dainty and petite. Equerry Gilbert was over 6 feet tall and muscular. It has to be me, dearest Albert. Victoria put her hand on her husband's arm. Albert shook his head. We exploring the hills and glens and lochs, having picnic adventures and enjoying the calm and the clean air. The time spent in Scotland became Victoria's happiest. She wrote in her diary, "The Scottish landscapes did one good and seemed to breathe freedom and peace, to make one forget the world and its sad turmoils." She described an expedition from Balmoral to the hill of Tullochas. "Splendid, was the most delightful and romantic ride and walk I had ever had." After Albert died on the 14th of December 1861, Queen Victoria thought that she too would die of a broken heart. She went into deepest mourning and wore black clothes for the next 40 years, to the end of her life. Victoria's mind and soul filled up with sadness. It seemed as though nothing could lift her spirits. To relive happy memories, she returned to Scotland and slowly began to take comfort from her surroundings among the quiet of the Highland glens. It was Queen Victoria's strong affection for Scotland that led to the establishment of Balmoral Castle as a favourite private home of the royal family, where they still enjoy holidays. Beyond the legend, Prince Albert did have a special parasol, lined with mail armour made for Queen Victoria, but due to its weight it was rarely used. It is in the collection of the Museum of London. Queen Victoria had no real intention of sharing any of her personal writings, but was persuaded to after the death of her beloved husband. Published in London in 1868, the book Leaves from the Journal of Our Life in the Highlands, 1831 to 1861, shows how much they both loved spending summer at Balmoral in Scotland. Victoria lived during a time of huge scientific progress, political reform and social change, a time now known as the Victorian era. Her reign was 63 years long, the longest for a British